The annual Davenport Gala was a night of pure spectacle, but for Amelia Davenport it was a gilded cage. She was the wife of the golden heir, Julian, yet she was invisible. That all changed when Julian's mistress, Chloe, cornered her by the champagne fountain. In front of everyone, Chloe sneered, "Servant, my glass is empty. Fetch me another." The room fell silent, waiting for the wife to crumble. But they didn't know the family patriarch, Arthur Davenport, was watching. And by the end of the night, a single piece of paper would change everything, proving that the quietest person in the room often holds the most power. The gravel drive of Willow Creek Manor crunched under the tires of polished European sedans, a sound Amelia Hayes Davenport had come to associate with suffocating dread. The estate, a sprawling testament to 3 generations of Davenport wealth, nestled in the rolling hills of the Hudson Valley, was preparing for its crown jewel, the annual Davenport Foundation Gala. To the outside world, this was philanthropy at its most glamorous. To Amelia, it was her yearly humiliation, orchestrated with monogrammed napkins and the silent, searing judgment of her husband's family. Amelia was not, by nature, a woman who belonged at Willow Creek. She was a woman of quiet libraries and the smell of canvas and old varnish. She'd been a junior curator at the Met, specializing in maritime art, when she'd met Julian Davenport. He had been charming then, a whirlwind of confident smiles and easy, inherited grace. He'd pursued her with a singular focus that she, a scholarship girl from Ohio, had mistaken for love. It was only after the wedding, after her signature was dry on the papers that bound her to him, that she realized it hadn't been love. It had been an acquisition. Julian liked collecting beautiful things that others thought he couldn't have. Their marriage, now 4 years old, was as cold and vast as the marble atrium of the manor. Julian, who managed a wing of the family's investment firm, had become openly dismissive. He traveled constantly for business, trips that Amelia knew, from the whispers of staff and the cold floral scent on his shirts, were anything but. He treated her less like a wife and more like a piece of inconvenient but necessary decor. She was the stable one, the appropriate background for his glittering life, and she was expected to play her part, host his parties, smile at his relatives, and above all, be silent. The true master of Willow Creek was not Julian, but his father, Arthur Davenport. Arthur was a man carved from granite and old money. He was in his late 60s, with a shock of silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. He rarely spoke to Amelia, but she often felt his gaze on her from across a dinner table or from the end of a long hallway. It wasn't a kind gaze, nor was it overtly cruel. It was an assessment. He looked at her the way he looked at the stock market reports or the J.M.W. Turner seascape in the study, analyzing its value, its authenticity, its performance. Amelia was terrified of him. He was the patriarch, the one who held the strings of the entire family fortune, and he had never, not once, given her a sign of approval. His wife, Julian's mother, had passed away years ago, leaving Arthur as the sole, unchallenged ruler of the Davenport dynasty. On the morning of the gala, Amelia was in the grand ballroom, overseeing the placement of the floral centerpieces. She wore a simple navy blue linen dress, her honey blonde hair pulled back in a simple twist. She looked, she knew, like a high-end event planner, not the lady of the house. "The peonies for the head table are drooping, Mrs. Davenport," said Mrs. Albright, the housekeeper. Mrs. Albright was a stern woman who had served the family for 30 years, and she was the only person in the house who treated Amelia with a measure of professional respect. "Thank you, Mrs. Albright. Let's have them replaced," Amelia said, her voice soft but clear. "And please, Ensure the string quartet has their refreshments before the guests arrive this time. Last year was unacceptable." "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Albright gave a short, approving nod. Amelia's one solace in this house was the house itself. While Julian saw it as a backdrop, Amelia had fallen in love with its history. She spent her days in the library, researching the architecture, the art, and the antique furniture. She had quietly undertaken the restoration of several 18th-century tapestries, and had even corrected the provenance on 3 paintings in the collection, a fact she'd mentioned only to the family's archivist. She knew every secret of Willow Creek, from the creaking floorboard on the 3rd-floor landing to the faint smell of tobacco that still clung to the velvet curtains in Arthur's study, decades after smoking had been banned indoors. Julian appeared in the ballroom doorway, already immaculate in the bottom half of his tuxedo, a silk robe covering his top. He was on his phone, a sleek black device pressed to his ear. "I don't care what it costs, just have the jet on standby," he said, his voice sharp. He glanced at Amelia, his eyes scanning her simple dress with visible disdain. He didn't greet her. He muted his call. "Amelia, for God's sake, is that what you're wearing? The guests will be here in 3 hours. My Aunt Beatrice is already on her way, and you know how she talks." "This isn't my dress for the gala, Julian. I'm working," Amelia replied, her voice flat. "Right. Well," he unmuted his phone, "try not to look so functional. And I need you to handle my father. He's been in a foul mood all week, asking about the quarterly reports from the foundation. Just keep him occupied. Talk about whatever it is you talk about. Old paintings. Dead sailors. Just keep him away from me." He didn't wait for a reply, just turned and walked away, his voice resuming its impatient bark. "Now, about the booking in Miami." Amelia closed her eyes for a brief second. She felt the familiar sting, not of tears, she was long past tears, but of a cold, hollowing emptiness. She was a fixture, a tool to be used, keep his father occupied, look the part, be silent. She went upstairs to her own wing of the house, pointedly separate from Julian's, to prepare for the evening. Her dress was laid out on the chaise lounge. It was a classic, understated gown by a designer Julian's aunt approved of, in a muted silver grey. It was elegant, beautiful, and completely anonymous. It was the perfect uniform for the wife of Julian Davenport. As she fastened the clasp of her pearl necklace, a simple strand left to her by her own mother, she caught her reflection in the full-length mirror. The woman looking back at her was pale and poised, her expression perfectly neutral. She looked like a ghost, haunting the edges of a life that wasn't hers. Downstairs, the first guests were arriving. The orchestra began to play a soft, classical piece. Amelia took a deep breath, straightened her spine, and descended the grand staircase to play her part. She smiled. She greeted senators and tech billionaires. She complimented dresses and laughed at jokes that weren't funny. She was the perfect hostess. She was the perfect wife. And she was completely, utterly invisible. The only person who seemed to register her presence was Arthur, who stood near the massive fireplace, a glass of mineral water in his hand, his eyes following her as she moved through the crowd. She met his gaze once, and he didn't smile. He just watched, his expression unreadable, before turning his attention to the CEO of a major bank. Amelia's stomach tightened. The performance had begun. She just had to survive the night. But a small, desperate part of her wondered what would happen if, just once, she stopped performing. What if she screamed? What if she ran? But she didn't. She smiled, took a glass of champagne from a passing tray, and turned to greet Aunt Beatrice, a formidable woman dripping in diamonds, whose first words to her were, "Amelia, dear, That color does wash you out, doesn't it? The grand atrium of Willow Creek was packed by 9 o'clock. The theme was Midnight in the Garden, and the florists had outdone themselves. Ivy and white orchids dripped from the chandeliers, and the air was thick with the scent of jasmine and expensive perfume. The low, confident thrum of 200 of New York's most powerful people filled the space. Men in bespoke tuxedos laughed loudly, and women with surgically precise faces observed each other with predatory stillness. Amelia was a masterful hostess, a skill born of desperation. She glided from group to group, ensuring glasses were filled, making introductions between a tech mogul and a prominent gallery owner, and deftly steering a slightly inebriated politician away from a journalist. She was on autopilot, her smile a carefully constructed mask. Julian, meanwhile, was holding court by the towering ice sculpture of a swan. He was in his element, his charisma switched to its highest setting. He clapped men on the back, kissed women's hands, and exuded the effortless confidence of a man who had never wanted for anything. He had not spoken a single word to Amelia since his command to handle his father. Arthur Davenport remained by the fireplace, a fixed point of gravity in the swirling room. He spoke to few people, but those he did, a U.S. senator, a federal judge, and his own CFO, a nervous-looking man named Mr. Harrison, approached him with a deference that bordered on fear. Amelia made a point to offer him a fresh glass of water, which he accepted with a terse nod. "The gala seems to be a success, Father," she said, using the honorific he insisted upon. "It is loud, Amelia," he replied, his eyes scanning the crowd, not her. "A lot of peacocks. The foundation will raise a great deal tonight," she offered. "It will." He took a sip of water. "Ensure the speeches begin at 10. My son has a tendency to let his social engagements delay the actual purpose of the evening." "Of course," she said, relieved to be dismissed. She was making her way toward the orchestra podium to check the time when the atmosphere in the atrium shifted. It wasn't a loud change, but a subtle one, like a drop in barometric pressure before a storm. The conversations near the entrance faltered, and a ripple of whispers followed the arrival of a new guest. Amelia turned, and her blood ran cold. Standing in the grand archway was a woman who was the physical antithesis of Amelia. She was tall, with a mane of jet-black hair cascading over her shoulders. Her dress was a shocking, brilliant crimson, cut so low in the front and high on the thigh that it bordered on indecent, yet it was clearly couture. Diamonds glittered at her throat and dripped from her ears. She was breathtaking, and she knew it. It was Chloe Preston. Amelia knew her instantly. This was the woman from the anonymous Instagram photos, the name on the credit card alerts for jewelry stores Amelia had never visited. This was the woman whose perfume had haunted Julian's suits for the past 8 months. Chloe paused at the entrance, her eyes scanning the room with a look of bored ownership. She hadn't come alone. She was on the arm of a minor Davenport cousin, a 20-something trust fund kid named Miles, who looked bewildered and utterly captivated. Chloe had found her way in. Amelia watched as Julian, mid-laugh with a bank president, saw her. His laughter died. His face, for a split second, was a mask of pure panic. Then he composed himself, gave a curt nod to the banker, and began to move, not toward Chloe, but pointedly away from her, toward the terrace. But Chloe wasn't there for Julian. Not yet. Her eyes swept the room, disdainfully passing over the lavish decor, the important guests, and finally, they landed on Amelia. A slow, venomous smile spread across Chloe's perfect, ruby-red lips. She detached herself from the hapless Miles and began to move through the crowd. She moved like a panther, all sinew and predatory grace, and the guests parted for her as if by instinct. Amelia stood frozen near a champagne fountain. She couldn't breathe. This was it. The private humiliation was about to become a public spectacle. She wanted to run, to hide in the library, to simply evaporate. But she was trapped by the expectations of the room, by her role as hostess. Chloe Preston stopped directly in front of her. She was a good 4 inches taller than Amelia, especially in her towering heels. She looked Amelia up and down, her gaze lingering on the simple pearl necklace with obvious contempt. "Well, well," Chloe purred, her voice a low, husky drawl that was designed to carry. Julian said he kept his staff plain, but this is a whole new level. A small bubble of silence formed around them. A few nearby guests, including Aunt Beatrice, had clearly heard, and were now watching with undisguised, hungry interest. "I beg your pardon." Amelia's voice was barely a whisper. She could feel the blood draining from her face. "You're the girl, aren't you?" Chloe tapped a long, crimson-nailed finger against her own chin. "The one who manages the house? Make sure things run smoothly?" Amelia's spine stiffened. This was a calculated attack. Chloe knew exactly who she was. "I am Amelia Davenport," she said, striving for a dignity she did not feel. "This is my home." Chloe laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Oh, darling, that's adorable. You actually believe that?" She held up her own glass, which was nearly empty. The massive diamond on her ring finger, one Amelia recognized from a recent insurance appraisal, flashed under the chandelier. "Don't be silly. Julian's wife is just a title, a placeholder. He needs someone to make sure the linens are clean." She shoved her glass toward Amelia's chest. "Now, be a dear and run along. You there, servant? My glass is empty. And get me one of those little crab puffs. Chop, chop." The world narrowed to the space between the two women. The sound of the orchestra, the murmur of 200 conversations, the clinking of glasses. It all faded into a deafening, rushing silence. "Servant." The word hung in the air, a poisoned dart. It was aimed not just at Amelia, but at her simple dress, her modest pearls, her entire existence. Chloe's smile was wide and triumphant, her eyes glittering with a malice so pure it was almost impressive. She was enjoying this, soaking in the rapt attention of the surrounding guests. Aunt Beatrice looked positively giddy. Amelia's hand, which had been at her side, twitched. She wanted to slap that perfect smug face. She wanted to scream. She wanted to take the champagne flute and shatter it on the marble floor. But she was a Davenport by name, and a product of a pragmatic Ohio upbringing. You didn't make a scene. You didn't give the bully the satisfaction. "I am not your servant," Amelia said, her voice trembling only slightly. "I am Julian's wife." Chloe's laughter was louder this time, a high, piercing shriek that drew even more attention. "Oh, honey, I know. That's what makes this so pathetic." She leaned in, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial, yet carrying, whisper. "He calls you his little mouse. His keeper. The boring, sexless woman he had to marry to keep his father happy. But I'm the one he wants." She pushed the glass harder, the rim of it tapping against Amelia's chest. "Now, are you going to get me my champagne, or do I have to complain to the man of the house?" "Oh, wait." She glanced around theatrically. "You are supposed to be the help, aren't you?" Amelia looked past Chloe, her eyes desperately searching for Julian. She found him. He was standing not 10 feet away, partially hidden by a large potted palm. He had seen the whole thing. He had heard every word. Their eyes met. Amelia's gaze was a silent, desperate plea. "Help me. Stop this. Say something." Julian's face was pale, his expression a mixture of fear and irritation. He looked at Amelia, then at Chloe, and then at his Aunt Beatrice, who was watching him expectantly. He saw the ring on Chloe's finger, the ring he had bought her. He saw the humiliation on his wife's face. And he did the unforgivable. He gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head. He turned his back, took a step toward the terrace, and raised his own glass to a passing acquaintance, pretending he had seen nothing. He left her. He left her to be devoured. That single act of cowardice shattered the last, fragile remnant of Amelia's hope. The emptiness she'd felt earlier became a sharp, physical pain, a shard of ice in her chest. Julian wasn't just negligent, he was cruel. He was a coward. "See?" Chloe whispered, her victory complete. "He doesn't even care. You're nothing. You're just the help." A hot, stinging tear finally broke free and tracked down Amelia's cheek. She swiped it away, mortified. The tears were what Chloe wanted. "Pathetic," Chloe sneered. "That is quite enough." The voice was not loud, but it cut through the atrium like a surgeon's scalpel. It was deep, gravelly, and radiated an authority that silenced the entire room in an instant. The orchestra faltered, the violins sliding into a discordant whine before stopping altogether. Arthur Davenport stepped out from the shadow of the grand staircase. He had been standing not 20 feet away, in a recess, watching the entire exchange. His face was a mask of cold fury. Chloe Preston, who had never met the patriarch, did not recognize the shift in power. She turned to him, annoyed at the interruption. "Excuse me, we're having a private conversation." "No," Arthur said, taking a slow step forward. "You are having a public execution, and I am terminating it." Chloe's confidence wavered for the first time. She looked from Arthur to the terrified faces of the guests, then back to Arthur. "And who are you?" Arthur didn't even look at her. His eyes were fixed on his son, Julian, who had frozen on the terrace steps, his back still half-turned. "Julian," Arthur commanded. The name was a whip crack. Julian turned slowly, his face ashen. "Father," he stammered, I was just getting some air." "You were," Arthur said, his voice deadly calm. "Allowing a woman of questionable morals to publicly humiliate your wife. In my home. At my event." Chloe finally understood who she was talking to. Her face paled beneath its expensive makeup. "Mr. Davenport," she said, attempting a seductive smile, "there's been a terrible misunderstanding. I just thought—" "You thought," Arthur interrupted, his voice dropping to a dangerous low, "that you could waltz into my home, uninvited, wearing a ring my son likely purchased with money he did not earn, and insult the lady of this house? You thought, Miss Preston, that because my son is a fool, I am one as well?" He took another step, closing the distance. He was now standing between Chloe and Amelia. He did not look at Amelia, but his presence was a sudden, impenetrable shield. "As for you, Miss Preston," Arthur said, "you are correct about one thing. There is a servant in this room, but it is not Amelia." He looked her up and down, his gaze as contemptuous as hers had been, but 1,000 times more powerful. It is the woman who barters her body for jewelry and believes it makes her a queen, when in fact it only makes her a commodity, and a cheap one at that. A collective horrified gasp sucked the air from the room. Aunt Beatrice looked as though she might faint. "You will return the ring my son gave you. It is property of the Davenport Foundation, as I suspect it was purchased with their funds. And then you will leave. My security will show you out." "You can't!" Chloe shrieked, her facade crumbling into raw panic. "Julian, tell him! Julian!" Julian stood rooted to the spot, trembling. He looked at his father's implacable face and said nothing. "Get out!" Arthur commanded. Chloe looked around, her eyes wild, searching for an ally. She found none. The faces that had been watching with hungry amusement were now cold and hostile. She had crossed a line, not a moral one, but a social one. She had forced the patriarch to intervene. She had embarrassed the family. With a sob of pure rage, she tore the massive ring from her finger and threw it at the floor, where it bounced on the marble with a dull clack. "You'll regret this!" she spat, her voice thick with tears. "All of you!" She turned and stormed toward the exit, the crimson dress a slash of color against the sea of black and silver. 2 discreet security men, who had appeared as if from nowhere, followed her out. The atrium was utterly silent. The only sound was the faint click of the grand doors closing. Amelia was shaking, her hand pressed to her mouth. She had been saved, but it was a brutal, terrifying salvation. Arthur stood for a moment, his back to her. He seemed to be composing himself. Julian remained frozen, a statue of cowardice. Finally, Arthur turned. He did not look at Julian. He looked at Amelia. His expression was not kind. It was not sympathetic. It was, as always, assessing. "Amelia," he said, his voice now back to its normal, clipped tone. "Come with me. We have matters to discuss. In the library." He turned and walked away, expecting her to follow. Amelia looked one last time at her husband. He was staring at the floor, specifically at the spot where the diamond ring had fallen. A staff member was already moving to retrieve it. Julian looked up, his eyes meeting hers. They were not apologetic. They were full of a new, cold emotion. Resentment. He was angry at her, angry that she had been the cause of his public humiliation at his father's hands. In that moment, Amelia knew her marriage was not just cold, it was dead, and she had just watched her father-in-law bury it. She straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and walked away from her husband, following the patriarch into the heart of the house. The library at Willow Creek was Amelia's only sanctuary. It was a 2-story room panelled in dark, rich mahogany, with a rolling ladder, a brass-railed mezzanine, and the intoxicating smell of old paper, leather, and beeswax. While the rest of the manor felt like a museum, the library felt alive, a container of history and knowledge. It was the one room where Amelia felt she truly belonged. Arthur Davenport did not turn on the main chandelier. He walked to the massive, unlit fireplace and pressed a switch, illuminating 2 green-shaded banker's lamps on the enormous partner's desk. The room was cast in shadows and warm, isolated pools of light. He walked to a small, hidden bar behind what looked like a bookshelf and poured 2 fingers of amber liquid. Amelia recognized the bottle as a very old, very expensive, single malt scotch into a heavy crystal tumbler. He did not offer her one. Amelia stood just inside the doorway, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. The adrenaline from the confrontation was wearing off, leaving her shaky and cold. The silence in the room stretched, heavy and taut. Arthur sipped his scotch, his back to her, seemingly staring at the empty fireplace. "You are wondering," he said finally, his voice quiet, "why I allowed that to go on as long as it did." Amelia was startled. She hadn't been wondering that. She had just been grateful for the intervention. I assumed you had just arrived, Father." He snorted, a dry, humorless sound. "I was on the mezzanine. I observed the entire encounter, from the moment that person approached you." A new, colder chill snaked down Amelia's spine. He had watched. He had watched her be insulted, be called a servant, be brought to tears. He had waited. "Why?" she whispered, the question torn from her. He turned to face her, his eyes dark and unreadable in the dim light. I was waiting to see what you would do. And, more importantly, what my son would do. He took a step toward her. You, he said, disappointed me. You cried. Amelia flinched as if he had struck her. After all that, this was his critique? I was humiliated. Of course you were, he said dismissively. The woman was a harlot and a fool. Her opinion is worthless. But you let her opinion, and the opinion of those vapid guests, matter. You let them break your composure. A Davenport, even one by marriage, does not cry where the enemy can see. She is not my enemy, Amelia said, finding a small spark of defiance. She is my husband's mistake. A flicker of something, was it approval, passed through Arthur's eyes. A mistake. Yes, a costly one. He walked past her and gestured to the wall opposite the desk. Come here. He was standing in front of the painting she had often admired, the J.M.W. Turner seascape. It was a swirling, chaotic depiction of a ship battling a storm, the sky a vortex of yellow, grey, and white light. My grandfather bought this in 1923, Arthur said, his voice softening for the first time. He was told it was a Turner. The family has believed it ever since. It's listed in our insurance inventory as attributed to J.M.W. Turner, with a value of $40 million. He looked at her. Julian, when I asked him about it, said it was old and dark, and that we should probably sell it and buy a Warhol. Amelia couldn't help a small, sad smile. That was Julian, perfectly. You, however, Arthur continued, have spent a great deal of time in this room. I have seen you. You've been studying it. He tapped the small brass plaque on the frame. Tell me about my painting, Amelia. And I want the truth, not the platitudes you feed my sister Beatrice. This was it. The assessment. She realized with a jolt that her entire future might rest on this. He wasn't just making conversation to calm her down. He was testing her. He was testing her worth. Amelia took a deep breath, pushing the trauma of the last hour from her mind. This, she knew. This was her world. She stepped closer to the canvas, her eyes tracing the brushwork. It's not a Turner, she said, her voice suddenly firm, professional. Arthur's expression did not change. Explain. The brushwork in the foam, she said, pointing to the crest of a wave. It's too precise. Turner's genius was in chaos. He painted the feeling of the sea spray, not the spray itself. This is technically brilliant, but it's imitative. The impasto is heavy, but it's applied, not fought with. Turner fought with his paint. She moved her gaze to the signature, barely visible in the dark corner. And the signature is wrong. The J is too looped. But the biggest clue is the canvas. I researched it in the archives. The canvas weave is Belgian, and the chemical composition of the gesso. It wasn't widely available until 1855. Turner died in 51. She had laid all her cards on the table. She had just told the patriarch of the Davenport family that his prized $40 million painting was a fake. Arthur was silent for a long time. He stared at the painting, then at her. So it's worthless, he said. No, Amelia said quickly. That's the fascinating part. It's not worthless. I'm almost certain this is a work by Clarkson Stanfield. He was a contemporary of Turner's, a rival even. In his day, he was just as famous. This is an exceptional Stanfield. It's just not a Turner. As a Stanfield, it's probably worth 4 or 5 million. But as a fake Turner, it's worth nothing. Its value is in its truth. There, it was done. Arthur Davenport stared at her, and for the first time since she had met him, he smiled. It was not a warm smile, but it was a genuine one, a smile of profound, satisfied respect. Its value is in its truth, he repeated, savouring the words. Indeed. He turned back to the painting. I knew. I've known for 20 years. I had it authenticated in '98. The Met's top expert, a man named Dr. Reeves, told me the exact same thing, down to the Belgian canvas. He, however, did not identify it as a Stanfield. He just called it School of. Your analysis was better. Amelia was stunned. You knew? Of course. I kept the plaque as a test for my family, for my associates, to see who would tell me the truth and who would tell me what they thought I wanted to hear, to see who had taste and who just had an appetite. He turned and looked at her, his assessment complete. My son, my sister, my entire board, they are all people with appetites. They see a plaque that says 40 million and they compliment the frame. You, he said, his voice firm, have taste. You have intelligence. You see the truth, even when it's inconvenient. You are the only person, besides Dr. Reeves, who has ever passed the test. He walked back to the desk. Which brings us to the matter at hand. My son, Julian. His face hardened again. Julian has not just been a fool in his marriage. He has been a fool in his business. The two are, unsurprisingly, linked. He picked up a thick, leather-bound folder from his desk. Miss Preston's gifts, her trips, her apartment in the city. They were not funded by Julian's salary, which is generous but not that generous. He opened the folder. My CFO, Mr. Harrison, brought this to me last week. Julian has been embezzling from the Davenport Foundation. Amelia felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. Embezzlement. The word sounded archaic, a crime from a black and white movie. But the cold, hard look in Arthur Davenport's eyes told her this was devastatingly real. From the foundation? She whispered, horrified. The foundation was the family's public face, a celebrated charity that funded children's hospitals, art scholarships, and environmental research. It was the source of the Davenport family's social and political power. Precisely, Arthur said, his voice laced with ice. The hypocrisy is biblical. He has been systematically siphoning funds from the St. Jude's Children's Hospital Endowment, our largest charitable partner. He tapped a spreadsheet inside the folder. It wasn't brilliant, it was brazen. He approved a series of invoices from a shell corporation he set up in Delaware, a consulting firm. The total over the last 18 months is just north of $4.2 million. Amelia sank into one of the leather armchairs opposite the desk. She felt sick. All this time, she had thought Julian was merely a cold, selfish, adulterous man. She had painted him as a victim of his upbringing, a man too weak to defy his father's expectations. But this was not weakness. This was malice. This was theft, stealing from sick children to buy diamonds for his mistress. That ring he gave her, Amelia began, was a $250,000 blue diamond, Arthur finished, purchased by Preston Consulting LLC. He's not just a fool, Amelia. He's a criminal, and he's a sloppy one. Amelia's mind was racing, connecting the dots. That's why he was so terrified when he saw you. That's why he's been asking about the quarterly reports. He knew the audit was coming, Arthur affirmed. He was planning, I suspect, to take Miss Preston to Miami tonight on our jet, and from there to somewhere non-extraditable. He was sloppy, but he wasn't stupid enough to stay for the fallout. Your public spat simply accelerated his timeline. So what happens now? Amelia asked. The party, the guests. The party will continue, Arthur said, closing the folder with a soft, final thud. The speeches will be made, but the script is about to change. He looked at her, his gaze intense. My son has betrayed his name. He has betrayed this family, and he has proven, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that he is unfit to be its steward. The Davenport legacy is not about money, Amelia. It is about power. And power, poorly wielded, destroys itself. Julian has destroyed himself. What are you going to do? I'm going to cut out the cancer, he said simply. He walked to the door. Wait here. Do not leave this room. When the time is right, Mr. Harrison will fetch you. Fetch me? But the speeches. You are the one who... I will make the opening remarks, but the keynote, he said, pausing at the door, will be a joint announcement. I am restructuring the foundation, and I am restructuring the family. He left, closing the heavy mahogany door behind him, leaving Amelia alone in the dimly lit library, the weight of the open folder on the desk pressing down on her like a physical object. She sat there for what felt like an hour, though the clock on the mantelpiece insisted it was only 20 minutes. The muffled sound of the orchestra starting up again, a lively waltz, filtered in from the atrium. The party was continuing, oblivious to the fact that the entire Davenport dynasty was fracturing at its core. Amelia's shock was slowly being replaced by a cold, clarifying rage. The years of quiet humiliation, the dismissiveness, the loneliness, it all paled in comparison to the sheer, sociopathic greed of her husband. He hadn't just betrayed her, he had betrayed everyone. He had betrayed the very concept of decency. The door opened. It wasn't Mr. Harrison, it was Julian. He looked terrible. His face was pale and slick with sweat, his tuxedo jacket rumpled. He had clearly been drinking, fast and hard. There you are, he spat, his voice a venomous whisper, hiding in here with him, plotting. You did this. Amelia stood up, her fear of him gone, replaced by a profound, icy contempt. I did nothing, Julian. You did this. You did all of it. She told you, he accused, stalking toward the desk. That lying. She told you I was leaving, didn't she? And you ran to him. You cried to him. You couldn't just let me go. You had to ruin me first. She called me a servant, Julian. Amelia's voice was quiet, but it cut. And you turned your back. What was I supposed to do? He yelled, his voice cracking. Defend you? And have Chloe cause an even bigger scene? Have her tell everyone right there? I was managing the situation. You weren't managing, Amelia said. You were cowering, but it doesn't matter. None of that matters now. What are you talking about? Amelia nodded toward the folder on the desk. St. Jude's, Julian. $4.2 million. Preston Consulting. The color drained from Julian's face. He stumbled, catching himself on the edge of the desk. He looked from the folder to Amelia, his eyes wide with a new, primal terror. He knows. He told you. He knew before tonight. The audit. Mr. Harrison. Oh, God. Julian's bravado evaporated, leaving a whimpering, terrified child. He grabbed Amelia's arms, his grip bruising. Amelia, baby, you have to help me. Please, you have to talk to him. Tell him I'll pay it back. I'll sell my condo. I'll sell the car. Please, he'll listen to you. He likes you. He's always liked you. The irony was so bitter, it almost made her laugh. He likes me because I'm not a thief, Julian. I'm not a thief, he shrieked. It was just moving money. It was my money anyway. My inheritance. I was just taking it early. It was not your money. It was for children with cancer. The truth of the words seemed to hit him, but he couldn't accept them. Amelia, please. Don't let him do this. He's going to ruin me. He's going to send me to prison. You ruined yourself, she said, pulling her arms from his grasp. You made your choice, Julian. You chose the diamonds. You chose the trips. and you chose to let that woman humiliate me. You chose to turn your back, and now there's nothing left to turn back to. You bitch, he hissed, his fear turning back to rage. You're just like him. Cold, calculating. You've wanted this all along, haven't you? My money, my name. Now you think you can have it all. Before she could answer, the door opened again. It was the nervous Mr. Harrison, his face pale. Mrs. Davenport, it's time. Your father-in-law is on the podium. Amelia gave her husband one last look. He was a pathetic, broken creature. A boy in a man's suit, trapped by his own colossal greed. Goodbye, Julian, she said. She walked out of the library, leaving him alone with the evidence of his crimes, and followed Mr. Harrison toward the atrium. She could hear Arthur's voice, amplified by a microphone, booming through the house. The reckoning had begun. When Amelia entered the atrium, a path cleared for her. The guests, who had been murmuring about the scene with Chloe, fell silent. They could all sense that the real drama was only just beginning. Arthur Davenport stood at a podium on the small stage, a single spotlight illuminating him. The orchestra was silent. And so, Arthur was saying, his voice resonant and strong, the Davenport Foundation has always been a pillar of this community, a pillar built on trust, on integrity. He paused, his eyes scanning the crowd. He hadn't seen her arrive. Mr. Harrison guided Amelia to the side of the stage, into the shadows. But that trust, Arthur continued, has been broken. Not by market forces, not by a bad investment, but by a deep and personal betrayal from within my own house. A collective gasp. This was not the standard, boring gala speech. My son, Arthur said, and his voice was flat, devoid of all emotion. Julian Davenport has been removed as head of the Foundation's investment committee, effective immediately. More whispers, more shocked looks. Julian's Aunt Beatrice looked like she was choking on her pearls. It has come to my attention, Arthur said, that Julian has misappropriated funds to the tune of over $4 million. Funds that were earmarked for the St. Jude's Children's Hospital. The atrium exploded in horrified murmurs. This was a scandal that would rock New York for a decade. Where is Julian? Someone shouted. My son is in the library, contemplating the consequences of his actions, Arthur said, his voice like granite. He will, of course, be repaying every single cent, and he will be facing the full legal ramifications of his crimes. The Davenport family does not hide from its mistakes. We rectify them. He let that sink in, the finality of it. The public execution was complete. This, Arthur said, leaves a vacuum in the foundation and a vacuum in the leadership of this family. A family's legacy is not carried in its name, but in its character. And my son has proven he has no character. His eyes found Amelia standing in the wings. He held out his hand. Amelia, join me. Trembling, Amelia walked onto the stage. The light was blinding. She could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes on her, the same eyes that, an hour ago, had watched her be called a servant. She stood beside her father-in-law. The art world knows Amelia for her keen eye and her quiet dedication, Arthur announced to the crowd. I know her for her integrity. I know her for her intelligence, and I know her for her strength, qualities my son sorely lacks. He turned to her, his expression unreadable. Julian has not only betrayed the foundation, he has betrayed this house. He has betrayed his wife. He brought his indiscretion into her home and allowed her to be humiliated in front of you all. He looked back at the crowd. You all saw it. You watched as Miss Preston called the lady of this manor a servant. You watched as my son turned his back on his own wife." He paused, letting the collective shame settle on his guests. There is indeed a new head of this household, someone who understands the value of this home, not as a price tag but as a legacy, someone who has respected its history when others treated it like a hotel, someone who sees the truth even when it's hidden. Arthur bent down and, from a shelf inside the podium, produced a large leather-bound document. It was old, embossed with the Davenport family crest. "This," he said, his voice booming, "is the original deed to Willow Creek Manor. It is not, as many believe, part of Julian's inheritance. It has always remained in my name. Solely." He turned to Amelia and held the document out to her. "Tonight, in front of all of you, as witnesses, I am correcting a grave error. I am placing the stewardship of this family's home into the only hands I trust." He placed the heavy document into Amelia's trembling hands. "Amelia Hayes Davenport," he declared, "I am handing you the deed to this mansion. It is yours, the house, the grounds, and everything in it, unconditionally, effective immediately." Amelia looked down at the deed, then up at Arthur, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Father-in-law, I can't." "You can," he said, his voice for her alone. "You passed the test. The house is yours." "No." A raw, desperate scream echoed from the back of the atrium. Julian was standing there, his face contorted in a mask of pure, childish rage. He must have run from the library. "You can't do this!" he shrieked, stumbling forward. "That is my house. That is my birthright." The guests backed away, horrified by this final, pathetic unraveling. Arthur Davenport did not raise his voice. He spoke into the microphone, his words cutting down his son with surgical precision. "Your birthright was this family's honor, and you sold it for a blue diamond. This house," he gestured to Amelia, "belongs to her. The foundation belongs to her. As of this moment, you are no longer a Davenport in anything but name. You are disinherited. You are disavowed." You bastard," Julian sobbed. He turned his desperate, pleading eyes to Amelia. "Amelia, tell him. Tell him he can't. It's our house. You're my wife." Amelia looked at the man she had once loved, the man who had let her be torn apart by his mistress, the man who had stolen from dying children. She looked at him, her gaze clear and cold, and felt nothing. No, not nothing. She felt pity, but more than that, she felt free. She held the deed to her chest. "No, Julian," she said, her voice clear and strong, projecting across the silent room. "It's my house, and you are trespassing." Arthur nodded to his security team. "See Mr. Davenport off the premises. He is to take nothing but the clothes he is wearing." Julian fought, but the two large men were efficient. They took him by the arms, and as he screamed and cursed his father, cursed Amelia, cursed them all, he was dragged from the grand atrium, out the front doors of the house that was no longer his. The doors slammed shut. Arthur Davenport turned back to the podium and to the stunned, silent crowd. He raised his glass of water. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, as if nothing had happened, "please resume your evening. The bar is open. And please, join me in congratulating the new chairwoman of the Davenport Foundation and the new matriarch of Willow Creek, Amelia Davenport." The gala fractured. Within 30 minutes, the gravel drive was a stream of departing headlights, the guests fleeing to spread the story that would dominate the city for months. By midnight, the house was silent, save for the quiet, efficient sounds of the staff clearing the wreckage of the party. Amelia stood in the grand atrium, the heavy leather-bound deed still in her hands. She felt suspended between the ghost she had been that morning and the woman she was now, the sole owner of Willow Creek. Arthur approached her, the fury from the stage gone, replaced by a profound, bone-deep weariness. "Why?" Amelia asked quietly. "Why give this to me? You could have just kept it." "I am a builder," Arthur replied. "I spent my life building a legacy I thought was for my son. I was wrong. I was building it for you. You value the truth. You passed the test of the painting, Amelia. But more than that, you passed the test of character. You endured my son's cruelty with a dignity he never deserved." He informed her his lawyers would arrive in the morning to handle the legal and financial fallout of Julian's crimes and her divorce. "I will be moving to the city townhouse," he concluded, a formal transfer of power. "Willow Creek is your responsibility now." After he left, Amelia found Mrs. Albright. Her voice was no longer soft. It was clear and firm. "Mrs. Albright, Mr. Julian will not be returning. I am the sole proprietor of Willow Creek." She gave instructions for the staff, including immediate raises, and laid out her plans for the next day. For the first time in 30 years, Mrs. Albright gave her a genuine, warm smile. "It will be my pleasure, ma'am." Weeks later, the manor was transformed. Amelia had established the Davenport Fellowship for Art Conservation, turning Julian's lavish, empty wing into dormitories and studies. The last of the $4.2 million recovered from seizing Julian's assets was returned to St. Jude's, along with a personal donation from Amelia that doubled the amount. Arthur visited her in the library, now a guest in his former home. "The Foundation's new charter is aggressive," he noted. "It's effective," she replied. "We're actually helping people." His gaze fell on the Stanfield painting. "Still a reminder?" "That its value is in its truth," she said. He smiled, this time warmly. "Indeed, Amelia. Indeed." She was the new matriarch. She was no servant. She was the master of Willow Creek, not by marriage, but by merit. Thank you for listening to this story. The silence of Amelia was mistaken for weakness, but it was the quiet of observation. She was the only one who saw the truth, and in the end, the truth gave her the power. The real servant was the one chained to their own greed and arrogance. What did you think of Arthur's shocking decision? Was it justice for Amelia or a cold-blooded business move? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one, and your insights truly help us craft these stories. If you enjoyed this journey of drama and vindication, please show your support by hitting that like button and sharing this video with a friend who loves a story where the underdog finally wins. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell. We have so many more stories of justice, revenge, and powerful transformations coming your way, and you won't want to miss a single one.